All right, let's move on to our next item, internal control audit report.
Tim.
Yes, we received the report from Miller Cooper a couple of weeks ago. It was reviewed last week with the Finance Council and then included in Board Book. I'd like to just start by saying that Miller Cooper is one of the most well-respected firms in working with school districts and other municipalities. I've been in business management and education for over 20 years, and I can tell you that they have a very well-respected name. They do a lot of presentations at the Triple I Conference, which a number of you go to. They also do presentations at the annual Business Managers Conference, and they do presentations and seminars and workshops. Overall, I believe that it was a positive report. I don't think there's any really glaring issues. There was a couple of questions with regard to the verbiage in the report, which I'll let them address. There was also a question with regard to how the credit card payments are handled. Credit card payments go into the activity bank account. There's a separate activity line for credit card payments, and it goes into that account, and then from there it is pulled out and paid over to the board accounts, whether it's registration fees or those types of fees. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of how we handle the credit cards.
I didn't understand they can go over when I didn't understand
Yeah.
the point they were making in the report.
So a good example, though, since most of the parents or board members had students here at one point in time or not, when some parents show up for registration, they have a fee balance that could be $800. That can include the district's registration fee, a yearbook fee,
Right.
but a bunch of different fees on there. So they pay the $800 with their credit card. That goes into one general activity account, and then from there, our business office lady that handles the activity accounts then breaks down that 800 and spreads it to the 4 or 5 different accounts.
Correct.
And if I'm not mistaken, the recommendation was that those credit card dollars should be in a different.
The student
just-
activity
I'm sorry, we
fund.
should introduce you.
This is Susan Jones and Betsy Allen. They're from
Part of
Miller
it-
Cooper.
Part of it is the, some
So
of the
let me
fees.
just qualify for, you were the auditors that wrote this report up.
Correct.
Yes,
All
with the staff person from our office who
Okay.
was here doing the work, and we were overseeing
All right, good.
that work.
So go ahead.
So we'll start at the beginning and then maybe
Okay.
address that.
Sure. You have those
Question.
questions, right? We sent them to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So good evening. I'm Susan Jones. I'm an audit partner at Miller Cooper, and this is Betsy Allen, senior manager, and we work on school districts, as Tim alluded to. So we had several conversations with Tim about what was going to be accomplished out of this report. And just to kind of go through the process that we did is we sat down with Tim and talked about the significant financial processes that affect your financial statements. And we decided to focus on 5 of them, which are the main 5 key financial processes that impact school districts. And what we did is we have industry transaction cycle forms that basically list out an overall process for revenue and accounts receivables or cash receipts. It has example industry controls, key controls, and then in those forms also it has questions on what we call what could go wrong questions. So within a process, if you don't have a control in place, what's an error that could occur? And based on the number of school districts that we audit, we populated those forms on behalf of the district, and then we gave them to Tim and his staff to tailor them to specifically what goes on here at the district with regard to those processes. And then what we did is to validate what that they had tailored is we selected a transaction from each process, from initiation to the recording of the general ledger, to validate key controls the district has in place, as well as to make sure that there's controls in place to prevent some of these typical errors from occurring. And overall, you know, based on going through that process, the district does have solid processes in place. They do have key controls to cover a lot of the errors that could occur. In addition to selecting a transaction from each one of those cycles, we chose an additional sample of transactions to validate the key controls were working throughout the year, not just like one period of time. So based on that, overall, as Tim said, there were no huge red flags that came out of it. The district has solid processes and procedures in place. But like a lot of districts that don't have a lot of resources in the business office, there are what we call separation of duties issues or segregation of duties issues, where, and the theory of that is that someone who has access to an asset, whether that be they're an authorized signer on a bank account, they have access to check stock, they have access to cash from parents that come in at the registration desk, shouldn't also have the ability to record journal entries or review bank reconciliations. That's the ideal situation. A lot of school districts with minimal resources do have these separation of duties issues. And there's controls that the district has in place to mitigate those risks. There's reviews by Tim, there's review by the superintendent of various reports, audit reports, budget to actual reports, and then obviously there's the oversight by the Board of Education and the Finance Committee. So the recommendations in our report are really more of highlighting, areas where perfect segregation of duties do not exist, as well as just illustrating some best practices. But one of the items is with regard to these credit card receipts. And basically, there's student activity funds that come in with regard to sometimes those credit card receipts, as well as registration fees. And this usually only occurs kind of at the beginning of the year or different times during the year where there's a lot of these fees coming in. But it's best practice not to really commingle student activity funds with funds that are meant for the district's use, because the student activity funds are really, the district is holding them in a fiduciary agency relationship where they're just holding the funds until the student clubs need the resources, whereas registration fees, that's the district's money. They're going to use that, to pay the services. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, and part of what we looked at too was, the time of the year we were looking at was registration time, and there was a lot of money going back and forth between the district and the student activity fund. And the concern is that the money is getting allocated properly, and that the money that belongs to the student activity fund is staying there, and the money that should be district funds is getting into the district funds. So that's where that comment came from.
Thank you.
And then with regard to the verbiage comment on the report, on the first page of the report, it talks about that we did our procedures in accordance with consulting services on the AICPA. And then it does say that we didn't issue an opinion on the district's internal control. And that is when you do a consulting engagement or agreed upon procedure engagement, or even when your external auditors do your audit, your external audit engagement, they're not issuing an opinion on the district's internal control. That's a whole separate engagement that would be significant dollars. And that's just standard language that has to be in our letter to make sure it's transparent to the users of this report that we did not issue a standalone opinion on the district's internal controls.
But if there was issues, you would have highlighted in your report.
Yeah,
If you saw issues that were like
red flags, if
yeah.
there were red flags, or even if we identified something unusual or fraudulent, we would have put it in our report. But again, just our evaluation of the specific procedures that we did, the district does have formal policies and procedures in place. And, in my opinion, there were no red flags at all, and these are more of just further enhancement to internal controls and best practices to consider.
What I need to understand is how much confidence should we have as a board that the exercise you went through, had there been fraud, you would have found it and we know about it? Or should we have no confidence in that at all?
I mean, I think you should feel confident that there's formal procedures in place and the staff is following them, and
Right.
there's controls in place. But even when your external auditors come in here, they, you know, as auditors, your external auditors are not responsible for finding fraud. They're responsible for.
I don't want you to explain it again, because we
Oh,
talked to the auditor
okay.
about it. We're reading your report. I'd like the specific question. Can, as the board, after we hired you, have any confidence, aside from the fact we trust the people that work for us, that there isn't any fraud being committed? Or could it be being done and we just still don't know about it?
I mean, that could, I can't answer that question for you. I mean, our engagement wasn't an engagement to detect fraud. It was to evaluate and identify the controls and the processes the district has in place. And we looked through the key transaction cycles, and there are controls and policies and procedures that the organization is following. We did not identify any reason to believe that there's fraud going on, but we didn't specifically design an engagement to detect fraud.
And the policies and procedures you talk about, are they written? So like if Tim wins the lotto tomorrow and somebody else comes in, you can just pick up a book and
The
do
forms
it?
that Susan talked about that we started with, that we pre-populated, and then Tim and his staff
Mhm.
tailored to your district, he does have those.
Okay.
As well as he does have his own policies and procedures in place that
Okay.
are more from a user perspective as well.
So if Tim wins the lotto, he can then fund the West Campus, and we'll name it after you, so. So my question to you is, compared to, and I know that you do this for a lot of school districts, this internal auditing and the auditing procedure and stamping, compared to other schools, are we up there? We're doing a good job? You know, I mean, are we?
No, definitely.
Okay.
There's monthly financial statement close in place based on our just interacting with Tim and the staff. People understand their roles and responsibilities. They're conscientious, and there are set procedures that we can tell that are being followed on a monthly, weekly, daily basis.
And truly, the only thing that would allow us the internal controls that an auditor would be gleaming over would be having enough people to do individual responsibilities, correct?
Correct.
Having one person that just does payroll, then having another person that does nothing but sign off on payroll and cut the checks and.
Right, so like typically you wouldn't want someone, the ability to add an employee, process the payroll, and then send out the checks. And that isn't occurring here, but there, obviously those are where fraud can occur, when there isn't that checks and balances of when the payroll report register is run, Tim's reviewing it to make sure the dollar amounts that the payroll reports are in are reasonable. You're looking at it as
Right.
well. So there's those mitigating controls from an NTD level perspective that are important. And so segregation of duties, what I like to always say, because when there's limited resources, people hate seeing in our audit report, they hate seeing the same comment every year. But we want to put it in there so the people that are doing these oversight controls know that their job is important and they should continue to do it, because it puts a check and balance on the people that are actually doing the work.
I think it's important to point out, I mean, the segregation of duties issue, you'll see in a lot of municipalities and a lot of governments. It's not a rare.
It's
rare
a norm,
finding.
not the exception.
Right,
Right. Because there's just not enough money to pay for enough people to work at the.
right. Now, if
And
there were.
it doesn't always make sense, the cost benefit of having
Right.
more people.
And sometimes those segregation of duties are glaring, so it would rise to like a material weakness if we were doing an external audit or a significant deficiency. But, you know, none of these segregation of duties issues, we would have, if we were doing an audit, would have risen to like a material weakness or something like that.
Okay.
I know you got some.
I would just have a question for you. I think it might be helpful for us to know if there are any of these recommendations you're making that are of a higher priority for us to address or look at.
I think one control that I think the district is actually really good that the district has in place is they issue receipts that are numbered, but nobody's following up that all the numbers, you know, that all the numbers at the end of the month are accounted for, and I think that would be really easy, and it would be a really added control with regard to the sequencing. And then just because the student activity funds and the commingling of cash, it's something that, you know, Tim and his staff are in the day-to-day and the operations, but that's just something when you're commingling student activity money and district money, you really,
Well,
it's
yeah,
something a little bit more sensitive to the the dollars aren't big in student activities, but the public is very sensitive to
Right.
those monies.
Well,
And
I just
that's
want,
why.
obviously, we're going to be looking to Tim to look at these things and give us some suggestions, I think, as to what he's going to do going forward. And it would help me, I think the board, and Tim to know the priority. And that's one. Is there anything else that you
I
would?
think when I met with Tim to go over the draft, and we went through a lot of the, you know, each of the different recommendations and sort of talked in depth more about a few of them and how to do that. So I have met with him and had some discussion on that also.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And you
for the
got your
auditor?
notes, Tim?
Yeah, I do.
He did, he was writing all over.
And I think is this, some of these recommendations that they're making are very simple things to,
Yeah, I thought so.
to implement. Others will be more complicated and
Any other questions for the auditors? Seeing none, I want to say something right now. Tim, based on the audit and what we heard from these young ladies here about the business office, I think you guys, we already knew you were doing a good job. This confirms that your office is doing a great job. And you're really watching out for the district's money. I really appreciate all the hard work your department does and you yourself and your staff. So I think this really shows a lot about it, so.
I have an excellent staff, and I've told them, they're, honestly, they are, in the 40 years I've been in business management, this is the best staff I've ever had. They're excellent.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your insight
Thank you.
and
Thank
report, and thank you very much for that.
Thank